They say a man's true character is revealed in what he does when he thinks no one is watching. Silas Thorne was watching everything. His tech empire, his looming IPO, and the woman in his passenger seat who cost more to maintain than his private jet. But as a beat-up sedan stalled in the California rain, Silas saw a face he hadn't seen in 500 days. It was the woman he had discarded like an old prototype. She was soaking wet, shielding a double stroller from the wind. In that split second, Silas realized the clean break he'd paid for was a lie. He didn't just leave a woman. He left a legacy he never knew he had. If you think you'd handle this better than Silas, stick around. Most people fail this test. Subscribe now, so you're not caught off guard when your own past comes knocking. The door slams so hard the frame shakes. Silas Thorne stands in a dim hallway that smells like old paint and desperation. His $1,000 shoes are planted on carpet that's seen better decades. He's shouting now, his voice cracking with something he hasn't felt in years, fear. They have my eyes, Eris. You can't hide that with a rent-controlled lease. The woman in the doorway doesn't flinch. Eris Vance looks at him with the kind of cold that only comes from surviving abandonment. They have your eyes, Silas, she says, her voice a frozen blade. But they have my soul, and I won't let you infect them with yours. She pushes him. The billionaire, a man who dictates terms to boards of directors across 3 continents, stumbles backward over a pile of donated baby clothes. Cut to black. To understand how the most powerful man in San Francisco ended up on the floor of a tenement building, we have to go back to the rain. 3 weeks earlier, Silas Thorne's office sat on the 42nd floor of the Transamerica Pyramid. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the San Francisco Bay like a painting you couldn't afford. His desk was black glass. His chair was Italian leather. The only sound was the whisper of climate-controlled air. No clutter, no chaos, no photographs of people who might demand something from him. He checked his Rolex, not because he needed to know the time, but because the weight of it reminded him he'd won. The green grid deal was done. His company would power half of California's renewable energy grid within 18 months. The contract sat in front of him, already signed. $40 million in guaranteed revenue. His assistant knocked twice before entering. Ms. Strand is here for the car service, she said. Kira Strand walked in like she owned the room. At 28, she was everything Silas appreciated in a relationship. Beautiful, independent, and completely uninterested in disrupting his carefully constructed life. She was a lifestyle influencer with 2 million followers and a calendar that never asked him to be more than he was willing to give. Ready? She asked, adjusting the designer bag on her shoulder. Always. They had dinner reservations at a place where the wait list was 6 months long. Kira talked about her latest brand partnership. Silas listened without really hearing. This was comfortable, predictable, safe. It hadn't always been this way. A year ago, there was Eris Vance, with her second-hand furniture and her dreams of a life Silas had no interest in building. She wanted Sunday mornings at farmers markets. She wanted holiday traditions. She wanted a future that looked like roots instead of wings. Silas had been honest with her, brutally honest. He didn't want complications. He didn't want obligations that couldn't be scheduled or canceled. When she kept pressing, kept hoping he'd change his mind, he'd made a choice. He'd written her a check for $50,000 and told her it was easier this way. A clean break. No drama. No drawn-out conversations about incompatibility. She'd looked at him like he'd just killed something beautiful. Then she left. She never cashed the check. Silas had checked his account every day for a month, waiting for the transaction to clear. It never did. Eventually, he stopped checking. Eventually, he convinced himself she'd found someone else, someone who wanted the life she was offering. Eventually, he forgot to think about her at all. His phone buzzed as they walked toward the elevator. Unknown number. The message was short. A year is a long time to keep a secret. Silas frowned, deleted it, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Probably spam. Probably nothing. The rain started as they reached the parking garage. Silas's electric SUV was waiting, sleek and silent. Kira slid into the passenger seat, already scrolling through her phone. Traffic was heavy. The city lights blurred against the wet windshield. Kira was talking about the restaurant's wine list. Silas was half listening, his mind already shifting to tomorrow's board meeting. Then the light turned red, and Silas Thorne's perfectly controlled world stopped. Standing at the crosswalk, struggling with something large and covered in rain-soaked plastic, was a woman he'd paid to disappear. She was still here, and she wasn't alone. The wipers scraped across the windshield in a rhythm that suddenly felt too slow. Silas leaned forward, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. It was her. Eris Vance stood at the edge of the crosswalk, her shoulders hunched against the downpour. She wore a cheap rain jacket, the kind you buy at a pharmacy when you can't afford anything better. Her hair was pulled back in a bun that looked like it had been tied in a hurry, maybe in a bathroom mirror before a shift she couldn't afford to miss. But it was what she was pushing that made Silas's breath catch in his throat. A double stroller. The plastic rain cover flapped in the wind, and through the streaked transparency, Silas could see two small shapes bundled in blankets. Babies. Twins from the look of it. Eris bent down, adjusting the cover with one hand while gripping the stroller handle with the other. Her boots slipped on the wet pavement. She caught herself, steadied the stroller, and kept moving. Why is that woman blocking traffic? Kira asked, annoyed. The light's been green for 3 seconds. Silas didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was doing math he didn't want to finish. A year. It had been exactly 14 months since Eris walked out of his life. 14 months since he'd handed her that check and watched her leave without a word. The babies in that stroller looked about 5 months old. The timeline fit perfectly. Eris reached the opposite curb and paused, catching her breath. For just a moment, one terrible, infinite moment, she turned her head and looked directly at Silas's SUV. Their eyes met through the rain and glass. Silas waited for recognition, for anger, for her to walk toward the car and demand an explanation, demand support, demand anything. Instead, Eris looked away. Deliberately, she turned her back, gripped the stroller, and disappeared into the crowd of evening commuters heading toward the BART station. Silas, the light. Kira's voice was sharp now. A horn blared behind them. Then another. The intersection was clear. The light was green. But Silas's foot was frozen on the brake. His chest felt tight. His vision narrowed. He couldn't catch his breath. This was a panic attack. His first. At 35, Silas Thorne, who had presented to venture capitalists at 23, who had fired 100 employees without hesitation, who had never once doubted a decision he'd made, couldn't breathe. Silas, what's wrong with you? He hit the accelerator. The SUV lurched forward. He changed lanes without signaling, cutting off a taxi. The driver leaned on his horn. Silas didn't care. He needed to follow her. He needed to see where she went. He needed to know if those babies... A city bus pulled into the intersection, blocking his view. By the time it passed, Eris was gone. Silas circled the block 3 times, searching. He scanned every sidewalk, every bus stop, every storefront. Nothing. She'd vanished into the city like she'd never been there at all. "Are we still going to dinner?" Kira asked, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. "Because if you're having some kind of episode, I'd rather reschedule." Silas didn't answer. He drove past the restaurant. He drove past his penthouse. He drove back to that intersection and parked illegally, staring at the crosswalk like it might give him answers. The gala was tonight. His company's celebration. 200 guests waiting to congratulate him on the green grid deal. Silas turned off his phone and kept searching the shadows for a stroller that was no longer there. Only 10% of people recognize a life-changing moment when it's happening. If you're not part of this community, you're choosing to stay blind. Subscribe before you miss the next signal. By morning, Silas had made a decision he swore he'd never make. He called Marcus Webb. Marcus was the kind of man who didn't appear in LinkedIn searches. He didn't have business cards. He had a phone number that changed every 6 months and a reputation for finding things people wanted to stay hidden. "I need a location," Silas said when Marcus answered. "And I need to know who else lives there." "Name?" "Eris Vance." Last known address was Hayes Valley, but she's moved. "Always does," Marcus said. 24 hours. The file arrived the next evening in an encrypted email. Silas opened it in his office. Doors locked. Assistant sent home early. The first page was a photograph. Eris standing outside a small apartment building in Oakland. The siding needed paint. The stairs sagged. It was the kind of place people lived when they were one missed paycheck from homelessness. The second page was a lease agreement. Apartment 4C. Rent, $1,800 a month. Occupants, Eris Vance and 2 dependents, Caleb and Rhea. Their names hit Silas like a fist to the chest. He kept reading. Eris was working 3 jobs. Freelance editing during the day. Data entry from midnight to 4 a.m. Weekend retail shifts at a bookstore in Berkeley. She was averaging 4 hours of sleep a night. The twins were 5 months old. Born at Highland Hospital. Emergency C-section. Mother hospitalized for 8 days due to complications. On the birth certificates, the father was listed as deceased. Silas stared at that word until it stopped making sense. Deceased. She told the hospital he was dead. He scrolled further. Marcus had done more than Silas asked for. He'd found a private social media account Eris used under a different name. It wasn't public. It wasn't linked to her real identity. It was just a place where she wrote letters to someone who would never read them. Silas clicked on the first post. Today, Caleb smiled. A real smile, not gas or a reflex. He looked right at me and his whole face lit up. He has his father's eyes. The same gray that used to make me feel safe before I realized they were just mirrors reflecting nothing back. Silas's hands were shaking. He read another. Rhea is stubborn. She fights sleep like it's a personal enemy. The nurse said strong-willed babies become strong-willed adults. I hope she's strong enough to forgive me for the choice I made. I hope she understands I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting her from a man who once told me children were biological anchors he'd never allow to drag him down. Silas closed the laptop. He'd said that 2 years ago during a dinner conversation about a colleague's pregnancy. Eris had gone quiet. He'd thought she agreed with him. He opened the laptop again. One more entry. The building sold today. New owners want everyone out in 60 days. I don't know where we'll go. I don't know how I'll afford first and last month's rent anywhere else. But I won't ask him. I won't give him the satisfaction of being right, that I couldn't do this alone. Silas pulled up the property records. The building had been purchased by Summit Holdings, LLC, a subsidiary of Green Grid Solutions. His company. He was evicting the mother of his children. Silas drove to Oakland without telling anyone where he was going. The neighborhood looked worse in person. Bars on windows. Graffiti on the bus shelter. A man asleep on the corner, covered in blankets that had seen better winters. Apartment 4C was on the 4th floor of a building with no elevator. Silas climbed the stairs, his expensive shoes echoing in the stairwell. The hallway smelled like old cooking oil and something sweet he couldn't identify. Baby formula, maybe. He knocked. Footsteps. Slow, tired footsteps. The door opened 6 inches. A chain lock held it in place. Eris looked at him through the gap. She didn't look surprised. She looked resigned. "I figured the car yesterday wasn't a hallucination," she said. "Can we talk?" "No, Eris. You don't get to show up here and demand conversations. Silas, you lost that privilege when you wrote me a check to disappear. I didn't know you were pregnant." "I know. That's why I didn't tell you." The words were so calm, so matter-of-fact, they took a moment to land. "What? You heard me. What?" Eris laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want the real answer? Because 2 years ago, you told me that if I ever got pregnant, you'd handle it. Those were your exact words. Handle it. Like a problem. Like a business liability." Silas felt sick. "I would never have forced you to, wouldn't you?" Eris's eyes were hard. "You're a man who solves problems, Silas. You would have solved this one too. And I wasn't going to let you." From inside the apartment, a baby started crying. Then another, joining in harmony. Eris glanced back, her whole body tensing with the instinct to comfort. "Let me see them," Silas said. "Please." "No, they're mine. I know the timeline. I know." "They're themselves," Eris interrupted. "They aren't assets for your portfolio. They aren't proof of anything. They're 2 human beings who don't need a father who sees them as a mistake he has to manage." The crying grew louder, more desperate. "I won't leave," Silas said. "I can stand here all night if I have to." Eris stared at him for a long moment. Then she closed the door. Silas heard the chain slide free. The door opened. The apartment was tiny, maybe 400 square feet. A kitchenette in one corner, a mattress on the floor in another, and in the center, a playpen where 2 babies lay on their backs, red-faced and wailing. The smell hit Silas first. Formula, diaper cream, the warm, slightly sour scent of infants who needed constant care. Eris moved past him, scooping up one of the babies with practiced efficiency. The crying stopped immediately. "This is Caleb," she said, not looking at Silas. The baby had dark hair and gray eyes. Silas's eyes. The other baby, still crying, reached tiny fists toward the ceiling. "And that's Rhea." Before Silas could move, Caleb made a choking sound. His little face went red. He was gagging on something. Silas froze. Eris moved with surgical precision, flipping the baby onto his stomach, supporting his head, patting his back in quick, controlled movements. A moment later, Caleb coughed. A small amount of milk came up. He started breathing normally again. Eris held him close, murmuring something soft and rhythmic. Silas stood there, useless. "I can help," he said finally. "Financially, I can. I'm offering $1 million. For you. For them. Whatever you need." Eris looked at him like he'd just confirmed everything she'd feared. "My children aren't for sale, Silas. Get out." The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Silas stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The view of the bay was perfect. The silence was absolute. And for the first time in his adult life, he hated it. He pulled up his bank account on his phone. 8 figures. Enough to buy almost anything. Enough to solve almost any problem. Not this one. He He couldn't buy back the 5 months he'd missed. Couldn't buy back the moment Caleb was born. Couldn't buy back the nights Eris spent alone, terrified, wondering if she'd survive childbirth without anyone there to hold her hand. His phone buzzed. "Kira, where have you been? You missed 3 meetings today." "I need space," Silas said. "Space? We have plans tonight. Cancel them." There was a long pause. "This is about that woman, isn't it? The one at the crosswalk." Silas didn't answer. "Silas, I'm not stupid. I saw the way you looked at her. So here's the deal. Them or me. You don't get both. Then I choose them." He hung up. 10 minutes later, Kira appeared at his door. She had a key. She'd never used it without calling first, but tonight she walked in like she owned the place. "You're throwing away what we have for some woman and her kids." "They're my kids." Kira went very still. "What?" "The twins. They're mine." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Of course they are. Let me guess. She waited until you were successful enough to be worth the trouble. She's been raising them alone. She works 3 jobs. She's being evicted from a building my company bought." Kira picked up her purse. "You're an idiot, Silas. You had everything, and you're going to trade it for diapers and child support payments." She left without slamming the door. That somehow made it worse. Silas sat down on the couch and opened his laptop. The file Marcus had sent was still there. He clicked through the documents again, looking for something he'd missed. That's when he saw it, buried in the communications log. A series of calls from a number he didn't recognize. The calls had been made to his office, to his assistant. Silas pulled up the phone records. The first call was dated 8 months ago. The last one was 3 weeks ago. He dialed his assistant's cell. "Mr. Thorne? It's almost midnight. Who called my office from this number?" He read it off. A pause. "I don't recall." "Don't lie to me." Another pause. Longer this time. A woman named Claire. She said she was calling on behalf of Eris Vance. She said it was urgent. "You'd left very clear instructions that Ms. Vance was never to contact you again. So You blocked the calls. I was following your instructions." Silas closed his eyes. "You're fired. Clear out your desk tomorrow." He hung up before she could respond. Eris's sister had been trying to reach him for 8 months. 8 months of chances he'd never gotten because he'd been too afraid of his past catching up to him. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Thorne?" A woman's voice, professional and detached. "This is Highland Hospital. We have you listed as an emergency contact for Eris Vance." Silas's blood went cold. "What happened?" "Ms. Vance was involved in an accident during her shift tonight. She's stable, but she's being kept overnight for observation. She asked us to call regarding her children. They're currently with a neighbor, but the neighbor can't keep them past morning. I'm on my way." Most people watch a man lose his soul and feel nothing. If you have the heart to stay until the end, you're different. Subscribe and prove you're not just a spectator in your own life. Highland Hospital didn't care who Silas Thorne was. The receptionist barely looked up when he gave his name. The nurse who directed him to the waiting area didn't recognize him from the business journals. His tailored suit and expensive watch meant nothing here. He was just another anxious person in a room full of people waiting for news about someone they loved. He found them in the corner. An older woman, maybe 60, sat in a plastic chair with a baby on each arm. She looked exhausted. Both babies were crying, their faces red and wet with tears. "Are you Claire?" Silas asked. The woman looked up, her eyes narrowing with recognition and something darker. Anger, maybe, or disgust. "You're him. I'm Silas. I came as soon as the hospital called. 14 months too late." She stood, shifting both babies carefully. Silas reached out instinctively to help, but Claire pulled back. Don't. You don't get to touch them until Eris says you can. How is she? Alive. No thanks to you. Claire handed him a diaper bag that looked like it had been repaired with duct tape. She'll want this when she wakes up. Room 302. Third floor. Then she walked away, leaving Silas alone in the waiting room with the sound of other people's emergencies echoing off tile floors. Room 302 was at the end of a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Eris lay in the bed, and in her arm, monitors beeping softly beside her. Her face was pale. There were dark circles under her eyes that had nothing to do with tonight's accident and everything to do with months of surviving on 4 hours of sleep. Silas sat down in the plastic chair beside the bed. He'd sat in boardrooms across 3 continents. He'd sat across from venture capitalists who could make or break companies with a single decision. He'd never felt as small as he did in this chair. His phone buzzed. A board member calling about tomorrow's meeting. Silas turned it off. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting IVs. None of them asked him to leave, so he didn't. Around 3 in the morning, Eris stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused. She looked at Silas like she wasn't sure if he was real or a dream brought on by pain medication. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came. The man who finally came home." The words were slurred, half-conscious. She closed her eyes again, drifting back into sleep. Silas sat very still, those words echoing in his head. "Home." The door opened. A doctor entered, clipboard in hand, face serious. "Are you the father?" It was the first time anyone had asked him that question directly. "Yes. We need a full medical history. Both sides. Any genetic conditions, blood disorders, allergies. The twins are healthy now, but we need complete records." Silas's mind went blank. "I don't know their blood types." The doctor looked at him like he'd just admitted he didn't know their names. "You don't know your own children's blood types?" "No." But Silas could recite the ticker symbols of every major company on the NASDAQ. He could tell you the quarterly earnings of his top 12 competitors. He knew the exact dollar amounts sitting in his retirement accounts. He didn't know if his children were type A or type O. The doctor made a note on the clipboard, her expression carefully neutral. "We'll run the tests. You should get that information for future emergencies." After she left, Silas sat in the plastic chair and realized that everything he'd built, the empire, the reputation, the perfect life, was worthless. Because he didn't know the most basic fact about the 2 people who shared his DNA. 48 hours later, Silas was on a plane to Portland. The $40 million deal was crumbling. The investors were getting nervous. His business partner had called 6 times, each message more desperate than the last. "If you don't show up for this meeting, we're done. Everything we built gone." Silas had left Eris stable in her apartment with her sister's help. The babies were sleeping. Eris had looked at him with an expression he couldn't read when he told her he had to leave for a day. "Go save your empire," she'd said. Not bitter, just tired. The conference room in Portland was glass and steel, overlooking the Willamette River. 3 investors sat on one side of the table. Silas sat on the other. Margaret Shun, the lead investor, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Thorne, we're concerned. You missed 3 scheduled calls. Your business partner is making decisions without your input. And according to the tech blogs, you've been MIA for over a week. So here's our question. Are you still committed to Green Grid? Or are we investing in a company whose CEO has already checked out?" Silas could feel the weight of the moment. This was where he was supposed to lie. Supposed to reassure them that he was focused, dedicated, unchanged. Instead, he told the truth. I have twin children I didn't know existed until 10 days ago. Their mother almost died in an accident while working a night shift to support them alone. I've been at the hospital in her apartment, trying to figure out how to be a father when I don't even know what that means. The room went silent. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. And you're telling us this because if I lie to you now, I'll lie to you later. And because the world I'm trying to build with Green Grid isn't just about profit margins. It's about the future. My children's future. Your children's future. Every child who'll inherit whatever mess we leave behind. Silas stood, moving to the window. 6 months ago, I would have told you success meant market dominance. Today, I'm realizing success means building something Caleb and Rhea won't be ashamed of when they're old enough to ask what their father did with his life. He turned back to face them. So yes, I'm committed. More committed than I've ever been. Because now it's personal. Margaret exchanged glances with the other investors. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Mr. Thorne, I was a single mother for 8 years. I built my first company while raising 2 kids alone. This entire meeting was a test. Not of your business plan, that's solid, but of your character. She slid the contract across the table. Anyone can run a profitable company. We wanted to know if you were the kind of man who could run a company worth investing in. Sign the contract. You passed. Silas signed. His phone buzzed as he left the building. A text from Kira. I've moved out, and I took more than just my clothes. Check your email. Silas opened his email. The subject line made his stomach drop. TMZ exclusive. Tech billionaire's secret family scandal. The article was already live. Photos of him entering Eris's building. Photos of the twins. Quotes from anonymous sources that sounded exactly like Kira's voice. The story was framed to make him look like a deadbeat dad who'd abandoned his children and only showed up when it was convenient. His phone started ringing. Investors, board members, journalists. The IPO was scheduled for next month. This kind of publicity could tank the entire company. Kira had sold his story to destroy him. Success is easy when you have nothing to lose. It's a nightmare when you have everything at stake. Subscribe now so you don't miss how Silas handles the ultimate betrayal. The house in Wallingford cost $3 million. It had 4 bedrooms, a yard with space for a swing set, and a kitchen large enough for a family to actually exist in. The real estate agent kept calling it a starter castle, like that was a normal thing to say. Silas signed the papers and called Eris. I bought a house. I want you and the twins to move in. Silence on the other end of the line. Silas, not as a couple, as co-parents. You'd have your own space. Complete independence. But the babies would have stability, and you wouldn't have to work 3 jobs anymore. I don't need you to rescue me. I know, but maybe I need you to let me try to make things right. 2 weeks later, Eris stood in the living room of the Wallingford house, holding Rhea while Caleb napped in a carrier on her chest. This is too much. It's what they deserve. The first month was a disaster. Silas tried to run the household like a company. He created spreadsheets for feeding schedules. He set up systems for laundry rotation. He hired a professional organizer to optimize the nursery layout. Eris pushed back on everything. They're babies, not quarterly projections. You can't optimize love. I'm trying to help. You're trying to control. They fought about everything. Bedtime routines, feeding methods, whether the house was too cold or too warm. Silas had never lived with someone who challenged every decision he made. It was exhausting. It was also the most alive he'd felt in years. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Rhea was burning up with fever. Silas woke to the sound of Eris pacing the hallway, murmuring soft reassurances while the baby cried inconsolably. "How high?" Silas asked, appearing in the doorway. 103. "I gave her medicine 20 minutes ago, but it's not working yet. I'll call the pediatrician." It's 3 a.m. They have an emergency line. While Silas talked to the on-call nurse, Eris ran a lukewarm bath. They worked together without discussion, each anticipating what the other needed. Towels, thermometer, a clean sleep sack. By 4 a.m., Rhea's fever had broken. She slept against Eris's chest, her breathing finally even. Silas and Eris sat on the bathroom floor, backs against the tub, too exhausted to move. "Thank you," Eris said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For not leaving when it got hard." It was the first real peace they'd had since she'd moved in. A week later, Silas was sorting through boxes in the attic, looking for space to store his old office equipment. He found a box marked "Personal, Do Not Open" in Eris's handwriting. He opened it. Inside were sketches, dozens of them, detailed drawings of a house with a wraparound porch, a kitchen with an island, bedrooms with built-in bookshelves. In the corner of each sketch, 2 sets of initials, AV and SD. These were plans for a life they'd never built. Silas was still holding the sketches when the doorbell rang. A man in a cheap suit stood on the porch, holding an envelope. "Silas Thorne." "Yes. You've been served." The lawsuit was from his former company. They were suing him for emotional distress and reputational damage caused by his abandonment of professional duties. They wanted $50 million, and they wanted him barred from working in renewable energy for 5 years. Silas closed the door and looked at the sketches in his hand, then at the legal papers. He'd left his empire to build a family. Now, his empire was trying to destroy him for it. Silas stepped down as CEO on a Wednesday morning. The press release was simple. Effective immediately, Silas Thorne will transition to a consulting role with Green Grid Solutions to focus on long-term strategic vision and personal family commitments. The tech blogs called it career suicide. Silas called it freedom. His new schedule was unrecognizable from his old life. He worked from home 3 days a week. He took Thursdays off completely. He was present for every pediatrician appointment, every milestone, every 3 a.m. crisis. And he helped Eris get what she'd always wanted. The children's hospital job posting appeared on a Monday. Communications director. Full benefits. $68,000 a year. It was everything Eris had dreamed about before the twins were born. "Apply," Silas said. "I can't." "Who would watch the babies during interviews?" "I will." "Silas, you have meetings. I'll reschedule them." "Apply for the job." Eris. She got the interview. Then the second interview. Then the offer. The day she accepted, Silas took her to dinner while Claire watched the twins. "You did it," he said, raising his glass. "We did it," Eris corrected. "I couldn't have done this without your support." It was the first time she'd acknowledged him as a true partner. The lawsuit settlement came together surprisingly quickly. Silas's lawyer had been preparing for a long legal battle, but Silas had a different idea. He called the board directly. "Drop the lawsuit, and I'll give you my remaining shares in the company. All of them. Use the value to create a foundation for single mothers in the tech industry. Childcare support, healthcare, emergency funds. Everything I should have thought about years ago." The board was silent. "That's worth $30 million, one member finally said. "I know exactly what it's worth." They dropped the lawsuit the next day. Silas had walked away from nearly everything he'd built. But sitting on the floor of the Wallingford house, watching Caleb stack blocks while Rhea chewed on a board book, he realized he'd never felt wealthier. The status shift happened gradually. The custom suits stayed in the closet. Silas wore jeans and t-shirts covered in spit-up stains. The expensive watch was replaced with a cheap digital one he didn't mind getting wet during bath time. And the electric SUV was traded for a used minivan with sliding doors that made loading car seats infinitely easier. His father visited once, flying in from Delaware. Richard Thorne stood in the Wallingford living room, surrounded by toys and noise and the beautiful chaos of family life. "Don't you miss it?" he asked. "The power? The control?" Silas looked at Caleb, who was currently trying to put a shape-sorting block in his mouth instead of the correctly shaped hole. "I never had power, Dad. I only had control. This," he gestured at the chaos around them, "this is power." His father didn't understand. Silas didn't expect him to. That afternoon, Caleb said his first word. Silas had been waiting for this moment, secretly hoping it would be Dad. Instead, Caleb looked at Eris and said, clear as day, "Mama." Eris's eyes filled with tears. She scooped him up, laughing and crying at the same time. Silas felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride, joy, and just the smallest edge of disappointment. But watching Eris hold their son, watching the pure love in her eyes, Silas realized something important. It didn't matter if Caleb's first word was for him. What mattered was that Caleb had a mother who'd sacrificed everything to give him a good life. Silas was just trying to catch up. Later that week, a letter arrived. No return address. Just Eris's name on the envelope. Silas found on the counter and almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail. But something made him open it. Inside was a single page, printed in Kira's distinct handwriting style. The letter was full of lies. Carefully crafted stories designed to make Eris doubt Silas's intentions. Suggestions that he was only playing father until the novelty wore off. Hints that he'd been seen with other women. None of it was true, but it was convincing enough to plant seeds of doubt. If you're still here, you're the type of person who values the truth over a quick fix. Don't let the algorithm decide what you see next. Subscribe and join the 1% who finish what they start. 2 years later, the Wallingford backyard was full of people Silas barely recognized from his old life. Eris's sister, her colleagues from the hospital, their neighbor who'd helped with emergency babysitting more times than they could count, Caleb and Ria's pediatrician, who'd become something close to a friend. No board members, no investors, no one from Silas's past who only knew him as the CEO. This was his family now. Caleb ran across the grass, chasing bubbles his aunt was blowing. At 2.5, he was all energy and curiosity, asking why about everything he encountered. Ria sat in Eris's lap, watching the chaos with her characteristic quiet observation. She was the thinker, the planner. Even at 2, she studied the world before engaging with it. Silas stood at the grill, flipping burgers, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd checked his stock portfolio. "You look happy," Eris said, appearing beside him with a pitcher of lemonade. "I am." It wasn't the passionate declaration he might have made in his younger years. It was something quieter, more solid, the kind of happiness that came from knowing exactly where you belonged. Eris and Silas weren't married. They'd talk about it once, late at night after the twins were asleep. But they decided that the piece of paper mattered less than the commitment they'd already made. They were partners, co-parents, and slowly, carefully, they were becoming something more. The party wound down as evening approached. Guests left with leftover cake and promises to do this again soon. The twins were exhausted, sticky with frosting, and completely content. Silas carried them inside for their bath while Eris started cleaning up the yard. Later, after the children were asleep, Silas found a package on the front porch. No delivery label, no return address, just a small box wrapped in brown paper. He brought it inside and opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a single baby shoe, brand new, size newborn, and a note. Caleb and Rhea aren't the only ones who deserve a father. Silas. See you soon. Silas read the note 3 times. His hands were shaking. Kira had been gone for 2 years. She disappeared after selling the story to the tabloids, moved to another city, blocked his number. He'd assumed she was out of his life forever. Apparently, he'd assumed wrong. Through the kitchen window, he could see Eris in the yard, folding up chairs in the fading light. She was humming something. She looked peaceful. Silas looked at the baby shoe again. Brand new, unworn. If Kira was telling the truth, if she'd been pregnant when she left, then somewhere out there was another child. His child. Another life he'd helped create and then abandoned, even if he hadn't known it existed. The pattern was repeating. Silas could tell Eris right now. Show her the note. Face this together. Or he could hide it. Pretend it never arrived. Protect the fragile peace they'd built. He thought about the man he used to be. The one who wrote checks to make problems disappear. The one who valued control over connection. That man would hide the note. But Silas wasn't that man anymore. He slipped the note into his pocket anyway. Just for tonight. Just until he could figure out what it meant, what was real, what he was supposed to do. Through the window, Caleb appeared in his bedroom, escaping from his crib again. Rio would be awake in 30 seconds, following her brother's lead like she always did. Eris looked toward the house, caught Silas's eye through the window, and smiled. She had no idea that their carefully built world was about to be tested again. Silas walked toward the back door, toward his family, toward the life he'd fought so hard to deserve. The note felt heavy in his pocket. Some debts he was learning could never be fully paid. Some mistakes echoed forward through time, creating new complications just when you thought you'd finally figured everything out. The question wasn't whether his past would catch up to him. The question was whether he'd learned enough to handle it differently this time. The screen door opened. Eris smiled at him. Twins are awake. Your turn. Silas smiled back, hiding the weight of the secret he was carrying. I've got them. The screen faded to gray. Most of you will scroll past this and forget the lesson within an hour. But for those who stay, those who subscribe, you're the ones building a life of purpose. If you don't subscribe now, don't complain when the stories you see are hollow. Subscribe for the truth.
Hey there. Thank you so much for watching till the very end. We really appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And guess what? The story doesn't end here. Click on the video right here on your screen to dive into another fascinating story. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Once again, thanks for being a part of this amazing community. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring stories that move you.